The government yesterday stunned the markets with an unexpectedly low fiscal deficit of 5.1%, and the assumptions were not very ambitious in terms of growth of the economy, the nominal GDP, or the tax buoyancy assumption. What were the calculations behind it and behind the strategy of austerity? I have with me one of the brains behind the budget math. We have with us the Finance Secretary, Mr. Somanathan. Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Somanathan. Well, first up, what is the strategy of bringing the fiscal deficit so much lower? I mean, 80 basis lower. You could have taken the liberty of a little more expenditure and actually stimulated consumption, perhaps. Why did you all prefer this alternative?
I think, first of all, I think this notion that in normal, non-pandemic times, the government has some obligation to stimulate consumption as opposed to stimulating capital investment is something that I contest. I mean, I don't think there is any obligation on government beyond looking after the poor and the vulnerable, which is a separate task which the government always has and must do. But if you remove the poor and the vulnerable from the equation, stimulating consumption is not per se a normal activity of government. It was a necessary activity during a pandemic. It was a necessary activity when everything else had stopped. But otherwise, I think the government's duty is on the one hand to promote growth and development, and on the other hand to look after the vulnerable and those sections of society that need government support. I think we have done both in this budget. And I'm not, therefore, one of those who feels that every time some, fast-moving consumer good company sees a problem with quarterly sales, government has to step up and give them more money to spend. I mean, that's somehow not the way I think of budgets.
I mean, it's a perfect argument, and I would be normally on the side of, austerity. Even 5.1 plus 3% is 8.1, and we have a lot of work to do. That point is taken. But at this point in time, consumption recovery from COVID is still uneven. There are definitely more vulnerabilities, and you have elbow room. You have this big $25 billion of FPI money that will flow in because of index.
Are they going to give it to us as a grant?
No, they are not.
So it'll be a loan which we'll have to service and pay. It will be part at the same interest rates that we service. So that's a source of financing. That doesn't give us any elbow room fiscally. It just means that there are more people willing to buy our bonds.
No. Absolutely.
On which they expect to be paid interest.
Oh, absolutely. I'm not taking that away. Yeah. But, and if that money were not there, you would have to perhaps
We have not counted on that money at all in any of our budget math. We are not even looking forward to it. That's an incidental thing that's happening on its own. We didn't even seek inclusion. We got included. It's coming. How much will come? I don't know. I'm not particularly worried about how much comes or doesn't come. Nothing we have done is based on their coming. So they come if they want, they don't come if they don't want.
I'm not saying that you would stitch the domestic policy to a 25 billion coming or not at all. But this year you were fortunately placed, plus there is unevenness in consumption.
I don't think the government is capable of sorting out all consumption unevennesses in the economy. I just don't think, I don't think these things work. Okay. I think the government has to be focused on development, on helping people improve their lives. And we are looking at the long run. We are not looking at the short run. The budget speech is very clear. Everything is oriented towards 2047. If you want to run a marathon, and it is a marathon to reach 2047, become a developed country. To run a marathon, it's a phrase that I used a while ago. I think you have to be fiscally fit. And to be fiscally fit, we have to prepare ourselves for that long run. We can't do things that are in the short run not essential. If we want to focus on the long run. And I'm not sure that really stimulating short-run consumption through some new form of subsidy or something which is very difficult to roll back is the kind of thing that governments should do.
Okay. No, that's a fair point. You don't want to run on steroids. You have to be fiscally fit. But
we have improved on our fiscal deficit without cutting back on any consumption. And whatever level of consumption we are, without cutting back on any expenditure. So we have not cut back. You can argue about how much we have increased.
Well, yes, this is entirely a revenue generating.
So it's not in that sense a recessionary or contractionary or austerity budget.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It is just that you could have thrown a crutch if needed. But let me come to another issue. The way the expenditure the department functions, you have been very strict in terms of releasing money. Now that's creating an illiquidity problem in the money markets, although there is durable liquidity. But there is an interbank deficit.
No, I think that is not a proper characterization. There is a cash balance, but half of it belongs to state governments. Now, I don't know why it's their property. They park it with us in the form of treasury bills and we pay interest on it. But I'm essentially, they're acting as a banker to state governments.
The other half with you?
The other half with us is a necessity if the bond markets would like to have steady weekly auctions and not variable amounts coming every week, which is what the RBI tells us they prefer. They tell us that they prefer to have a steady planned flow with a calendar that's announced. So if there are short-term cash flow fluctuations, we are not exercising the option of changing our auctions every week in order to optimize our liquidity.
Yes.
We will be ending our borrowing program shortly, and our peak expenditures happen between February 15th and March 31st, when we don't have any borrowing program. So how else are we supposed to manage our cash if we want to both please the bond market by giving a steady weekly auction and vacating space for the states in the last 6 weeks and not having an excess cash balance? It's an impossible trinity. We can't, and it's not our fault if there is lack of liquidity, because we are not overspending, we are not overborrowing. We are not taking more from the markets. We are not underspending. We will reach the expenditure numbers which we have given you in the budget. It is not my job in the central government to manage liquidity for 6 weeks. It's not liquidity is not my problem.
No, I agree it's not. But I'm just saying that this is ultimately you know.
We will be spending the monies that we have said we will be spending. And if we have to maintain steady weekly auction numbers, it is not possible for us to avoid short-term peaks and troughs in our cash balance.
No, I agree that for the last 6 weeks you don't borrow, and so you have to have cash balances. But you all have been running cash balances for a pretty long time now, and therefore RBI is kind of having to manage an illiquidity issue. The bond markets more than RBI are worried.
We can talk to RBI about having a more variable bond borrowing calendar. We can vary it every week so that we can calibrate it to next week's cash balance. That would be helpful to us.
Yes.
We would then pay less interest.
Yes.
Because we are unnecessarily paying interest by maintaining a steady flow of bond issuance. Perhaps we should have a more variable bond issuance would help us manage our cash flow. Because we cannot, just to please the bond market, we can't release money that is not being spent in the states. We can't say, look, bond market's having a problem. Will you please dump this money on somebody who's not yet ready to receive it? Can't be done.
Okay, but is there a plan?
So just-in-time management means that money is released when the money is required. If the money is not required, I can't release it just because the bond market would benefit or the liquidity would benefit. I
agree. But are you planning any variable bond issuance?
No, it's a point that you've brought up. If it is a serious issue, I'll be happy to take it up with the RBI.
Okay.
See if variable issuance can help calibrate this better.
The liquidity
but I don't know if that would be good overall for the functioning of the market.
I don't think they'll be very happy with it. That will be two uncertainties for the bond markets. I can see that. There is this whole page on abstract of receipts.
Yes.
Now, it's very clear, how the debt receipts come, market loans, T-bills.
Correct.
There's one item called other receipts, which is surprising because this year it has given you 78,200 crore and next year it is minus 30,000.
Yeah, these are fund transfers. See, these are non-cash items where we have something called a public account.
Yeah.
Government of India has a consolidated fund and a public account. We are required for certain cesses that we levy, such as the agriculture. It's basically a technical adjustment. It's not, but that is the effect on cash flow, is what is reflected there. This year, we have agriculture and infrastructure development cess. We have something called a central road and infrastructure financing cess. We have something called a Madhyamik and Uchatar Shiksha Kosh, which is also the C&AG has said that if there is collection, these should first be routed into a fund account in the public account, and it can then be used to settle amounts in years when you want to use it to pay off something. In those schemes, those specific schemes which are earmarked, Madhyamik and Uchatar Shiksha or etc. This year, there were past years when we have not made payments into these funds. Okay. So we are making up for some of those past payments based on the CAG's advice that you have short paid this amount into the cess fund. So there is an excess.
The doubt I got is that are you using the cess money for things other than education?
We can't. Okay. We can't.
It is used only for...
Each one is used, and there's a detailed accounting. If you want to go into the demand books, you can go into the demand books and see. The Comptroller and Auditor General audits our books. So we can't use Madhyamik cess for roads. No, we can't use road cess for Madhyamik Shiksha, etc. There is an accounting procedure.
Okay.
But
No,
we have in
I
the
was
past
wondering if you are
not
using this-
completed the credits. Some of these cesses are new. So there's been a lag between the levying of the cess and the accounting for the cess. So we are now depositing those arrears into the cess. So this year it is an expenditure, but it's not cash. So it's a source of financing. Next year, some expenditures are being met from that cess. So then it is not. It's a reduction of expenditure next.
Why is it so difficult to divest? Public sector banks, market capitalization has doubled. It's almost 100% increase year on year. And entire
I'm afraid
public
you
sector.
have to ask this question to my colleague Tuhin Kant Pandey, who has more detail. But I'll tell you what he says. And no, first there is a policy issue which you are raising, and then there is the practical issue. On the policy issue, there's been no change to the government's policy. The policies announced remain, but execution takes time. You know that IDBI Bank is a complex. It's currently pending with the Reserve Bank in terms of getting their some of their. That's
Fit
my.
and proper.
I don't know what exact stage it is in, but it is my belief that the matter is currently with the Reserve Bank. They're awaiting a regulatory clearance from them. So those transactions are on. Nothing has stopped. I mean, whatever is on, it's going on. But what we have changed is the presentation of the numbers. We are not presenting a separate number for disinvestment. We've taken a policy decision that we don't use disinvestment as a means of funding our fiscal requirements. That we will use disinvestment as a part of our larger public asset management strategy, maximize our value. If maximizing value conflicts with fiscal management, then maximization of value takes priority. We are not going to say, we need this much cash from you this year to fill the budget hole. So you have to sell the shares by 31st March, which we used to do at one point of time. We don't do that anymore. So we are saying, look, pressure is off. You give us resources as dividend, give us resources as disinvestment, give us resources to boost the economy by incurring capital expenditure. 3 different purposes for which public sector enterprises can be used. So in certain cases, we may actually opt for a lower dividend if they need it for capital expenditure. We may opt for a higher dividend. We may sell the share. What this is, the idea is to maximize the value that we can get from our public sector assets by de-emphasizing the short-term fiscal imperative.
This is excellent answer. I'm not denying all these. All these are well taken. But still, when the markets are in a fine position, and it is the stated position of the government that it does not want to stay in certain areas beyond 2 or 3 strategic companies, then why are you not using the opportunity that the market is giving? There seems to be a serious execution block here.
I am not sure. Well, execution of disinvestment is difficult. I don't deny that. I think it's very difficult to execute disinvestment in a country whose political economy is as, shall I say, complex as India's. So that is an issue. Execution is an issue, and it's something that we will tackle. But as of now, I think we have the numbers that we have.
This revenue buoyancy, what is giving this buoyancy? Is it that you are using some artificial intelligence and machine learning to be able to...
It's a combination of many factors. First, I would say, again, people have perhaps forgotten, but a lot of this work started in 2017. After the demonetization deposits, there was a huge trail of information that had become available. And that data was mined. And it was mined using a word which was less well known then, but was known even then, which is artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence was used even then. And it started, notices went out to lots of people who had previously not been filing returns or had been filing disproportionately low returns. So that process takes time. That is one of the reasons that return filing has increased and return filing amounts have increased. But that's a long process. In the recent past, some of the systemic improvements like reporting your own data back to you before you file your return has also improved compliance substantially. Some people may have forgotten things that they earned, it's possible, and some people may have deliberately forgotten, but both of them are now reminded. So the voluntary compliance has improved, and there have been a number of other system improvements, as a result of which I think we are seeing, and the increased coverage of tax deduction at source and tax collection at source is another factor.
Then why are you not assuming that kind of an income tax growth for this year also?
Well, it's something that we don't want to count our chickens before they hatch. We want to be conservative. Is this a one-time improvement because of these improvements? Or is it going to be so we are only expecting 11.5% growth next year.
Exactly.
Because we're not sure. See, suppose it's a base. Suppose I have traditionally underreported by 10%. The new system has made me go back to 100. So that's factored into this year.
Okay.
Will there be a further 10% growth next year? I don't know. I mean, why would I count that chicken yet? I mean, we know that there's been a step improvement currently.
But you cannot.
Is that a recurring feature or would that be a one-time correction? We're not going to have a new system next year.
Yes.
So
Yes.
does the new system create that impact one time and thereafter it grows in proportion to the economy, or is there going to be a further step correction? I wouldn't know. We don't want to hazard too optimistic a guess. We want to be conservative on
Well,
that.
you're a great observer of the economy as well. What is your sense? Is this 7 something which is possible for next year? I mean, there are global headwinds. Already, if you looked at the personal final consumption expenditure in the NSO numbers, it's only 4.4%. And you're taking away a bit of the fiscal crutch. So, how do you see the economy next year? Will it be able to withstand all this?
I would say this. I don't think we are, I think we are not giving the economy a better fiscal crutch.
Yes.
We are retaining the crutch that it has. So it's, we have not reduced capital expenditure. We have not reduced revenue expenditure. We have, in aggregate terms, in real terms, there's no contraction in expenditure. So the current growth has been sustained with this level of expenditure. So I think that level of growth will continue. Will it be 7%? I wouldn't want to hazard a guess. I think it will be above 6%, definitely.
Oh, of course. Oh, of course. That's not to be doubted.
I'm counting on it being above 6%.
Okay.
That's all I'm counting on from a fiscal perspective.
Then it has to be a 4.5% inflation.
Yeah.
Okay,
Which is not perhaps ridiculously low or high.
No, it's not.
Yeah.
I mean, after all,
Or high. I think that's a
we had a
reasonable-
minus WPI all of last year.
But I don't think that will continue this year.
So therefore,
I don't
it can-
think statistically it's likely that you'll have a second year of
No.
WPI contraction.
In fact, it will be higher because
Exactly,
of the low base.
exactly. So-
Okay. So let's look at, then we should not assume 4 plus 3.5. We could assume 6.5 plus 4.
Any combination, 6 plus 4.5, 6.5 plus 4, 7 plus 3.5.
No, some have betted on 7, so I wanted your opinion.
Sorry?
Some people have betted on 7% GDP, isn't it? I think the
I
governor was quoted.
am not necessarily betting on 7%. I'm betting on it being better than 6%.
What is troubling private capex according to you? And second, why didn't you give a little more crutch? You could have done 12% easily. You could have done 12 lakh crore, 12% growth in, a 12 lakh crore.
We could have chosen to have a higher deficit and give a bigger
Exactly.
crutch, or to have a lower deficit. We are committed to reaching our deficit targets in 2025-26. And we don't think backloading a consolidation is as easy as it appears. We are quite committed to our consolidation. We are also committed to adequate capital. I don't have any, approved requests for funding from central ministries which are unfunded. Nothing.
Is there a problem of absorption of capex? Is there a consumption, a bandwidth to being able to spend?
It is traditionally, government capital expenditure is in long gestation projects.
Yes.
They take time to ground, and we are a democracy. We take time to acquire land. We take time to give environmental clearance. We have people agitating against both of them. It's a democracy. It's natural. It should happen. So in such an economy, the gestation period between committing to a project and actually spending money is long. So in that kind of economy, taking a decision and actually seeing cash being committed, there is a lag. So there is an absorption issue that we can't suddenly, it's not like the only expenditure which you can guarantee will happen this fiscal year to give the economy a particular calibrated stimulus is if we put money into people's bank accounts.
Yeah.
Even that is not guaranteed to stimulate spending because it can go into saving. So there is actually, the government has limitations in terms, it's not some magic machine which will, even if we were to put money into bank accounts, how do you know it won't go into SIPs?
No.
And will go into consumption? It may not. It may go into SIPs, may not be consumed.
Even this year, your capex is not entirely reached. I mean, you're falling short by about a few thousand, 30,000 crores.
Correct.
So was that an absorptive issue?
Partly an absorptive issue, partly an issue that some of the state capital expenditure is conditional on reforms. For example, we have a certain amount that is conditioned on power reforms. If a state doesn't do it, they don't get the money. So if a state takes a decision that we prefer not to carry out this particular condition, we don't want the money, then we don't give them the money. Now, one could argue that you should be more liberal so that the macro economy will do better with more consumption if you don't have any conditionality. So we should tell them, please encourage consumption by giving more freebies, or that we have chosen not to do.
Okay, sir.
I mean, there is a short-term, long-term trade-off. Everything cannot be decided on the short term. If money can be given for free, then more money would be spent this year, but less reform would be done in the states.
Well, I mean, I would give a lot of respect even to state governments and their political preferences.
Yes.
So
we respect that.
Okay.
They are free to make their choices.
Okay.
But the money will not be given if a particular reform is
Yeah,
not done.
there is more money with you all also because you'll have chosen to tax a lot by way of cess. If that cess is not shareable, if all that had gone through taxes, maybe you would not be in this position.
But then maybe we will have to have less expenditure on our side.
Even without that, there is a rising cess compared to, say, 10 years ago or
There is
20 years
also
ago.
rising devolution. Absolute devolution amounts have risen very substantially over this period.
Well, I don't want to argue for the states, but I think they will prefer shareable
I'm sure they will.
devolution
That's for the
than
Finance
through
Commission
cess.
to take a view
It's a
on.
grant issue.
Yeah.
In FY25, when a new term starts, what do you think will be the next generation reforms? What
Again,
would you like?
I don't want to preempt the regular budget, where the minister has said you will get the details.
Okay. Well, a final question. You have delivered extremely well in terms of, fiscal deficit. So, what would you therefore want the reserve?
There's one thing I wanted to add on cess, since you brought it up earlier just now. Cess can work both ways. This year, the states have benefited from a 16.5% increase in devolution against a tax collection increase of 12.5%. Why is that? Because last year's cut in the cess on diesel and petrol was entirely on the centre, because the cess was entirely on the centre. So if in times of trouble the centre levies a cess, which was done in 21-22 and used, among other things, for COVID vaccination, many other activities that the states wanted the centre to do, when the price was cut last year, it was cut entirely by the centre.
No,
That
that's
was
a
not
fair
entirely by the centre.
That's a fair point.
That is why this year devolution growth is 16.5%, tax growth is 12.5%.
No, that's a fair point.
It works both ways.
It works both ways in some cases, not in all cases.
Which cases does it not work in?
Okay, well, that'll require a lot of time. I mean, there are several other cesses, that Kisan, Garib Kisan and all which were...
These cesses have been there since independence. Cesses and surcharges were not imposed in 2014. They've been imposed from time immemorial. This has been a constant argument between states and centre for 75 years.
Okay.
Multiple finance commissions have opined on this, and it is a continuing issue in centre-state finances. It's not new. And cesses were very substantial right from 2004, when the largest cesses were imposed. 2004, you had a particular level of cess with 32% devolution. In 2014, you had a higher level of devolution and a higher level of cess. But the net transfer to states has increased since the 14th Finance Commission, despite the higher level of cesses. This is provable. You can see the report of the 15th Finance Commission.
Okay. I will leave it at that. Thank you very much for your time. And here's wishing that FY25 indeed turns out to be as good a year as FY24.